You stand at a funeral. Someone places flowers on a casket. Everyone goes quiet. You have seen this 100 times, in 100 forms, and it feels like simple politeness, a modern custom, something invented by a church or a culture a few centuries ago. But the real answer is far stranger. This behavior is not new. It is not even human. It is older than your species, older than language, older than the cities you live in. Somewhere in a cave in the mountains of Iraq, 60,000 years ago, someone else was doing the exact same thing. That someone was not a modern human. It was a Neanderthal, and what they left behind changed the way scientists think about grief itself. History of Earth, when an animal died, it was simply left. Eaten by scavengers, broken down by weather, absorbed back into the ground. No ritual, no pause. Death was just an ending, and the world moved on without ceremony. Then, something shifted. Somewhere in the deep past, a hominin species began doing something no animal had done before. They started to bury their dead on purpose. Why would that matter? Think about what burial actually requires. It requires digging. It requires time. It requires choosing a specific spot and returning to it. It requires believing, even in some small, unspoken way, that the body still matters after the person inside it is gone. That is not a small leap. That is one of the biggest leaps a mind can make. The oldest confirmed deliberate burials come from Neanderthals, not from modern humans. This surprises most people. Neanderthals are usually imagined as brutish, simple, barely capable of thought. But at a site called Shanidar Cave, archaeologist Ralph Selecki uncovered something in the 1950s that forced a rethink. A Neanderthal skeleton, buried in a shallow grave, surrounded by soil, containing unusually high concentrations of pollen. Selecki proposed that flowers had been placed with the body. Newspapers ran the story as the flower burial. Neanderthals, it seemed, mourned. That interpretation has been debated for decades. Some researchers argue the pollen came from burrowing rodents, not human hands. But here's the part that survived the debate. The body itself was clearly, deliberately buried, curled into a specific position, placed with intention. Whether or not flowers were involved, someone decided this person's body should not simply be left where they fell. Pause here for a second. Why does that decision matter so much? Because burial is evidence of an idea, not just an action, but a belief behind the action. Archaeologist Paul Pettit, who has spent years studying the origins of human burial, argues that intentional burial marks a turning point in cognition itself. It suggests a species capable of symbolic thought, a species that could look at a dead body and think, this still means something. This is still someone. That idea did not stay isolated to one cave. Sites across Europe and the Middle East, dated between 40 and 100,000 years ago, show similar patterns. Bodies placed in fetal positions, bodies oriented east to west, bodies buried with tools, with red ochre pigment, with animal bones arranged nearby. Researcher João Zilhão, who has studied Neanderthal sites extensively, points to ochre use in particular as a sign of symbolic behavior, stretching back further than most people assume, tied not just to burial, but to a broader capacity for meaning-making. Here is where it gets stranger. Humans were not the first to show grief-like behavior. They were just the first to formalize it into ritual. Elephants stand over the bones of dead herd members, touching them gently with their trunks, sometimes for hours. Chimpanzees have been observed carrying the bodies of dead infants for days, unwilling to let go. Crows gather around their dead in what researchers call a funeral, seemingly assessing danger, seemingly processing loss. Primatologist Barbara King, who has spent her career studying animal grief, argues that mourning is not uniquely human at all. What is unique is what humans did with it. Animals grieve in the moment. Humans built a structure around the moment and then repeated that structure, generation after generation, until it became culture. That repetition is the real story here. A single Neanderthal burial is a moment. A pattern of burials across a species is a tradition. And traditions do not happen by accident. They happen because something about the practice felt necessary, worth passing on, worth teaching to the next person who faced the same unbearable fact. And that fact has not changed. Every human who has ever lived has had to face the death of someone they loved. Every human brain, whether 60,000 years ago or this morning, has had to process the same impossible math. A person who was there yesterday is not there today. Nothing prepares you for that gap. Nothing give grief a shape. Without a shape, grief just spreads out, formless, endless, impossible to hold. A funeral gives you a time to cry and a time to stop. A burial gives you a place to return to. Flowers, real or imagined at Shanidar, give you a small physical act to perform when words fail completely. This is not primitive thinking. This is one of the most sophisticated psychological tools your species has ever built, and it was built almost as early as thought itself. Consider what that means about you. Standing at a funeral in your own life, placing your own flowers on your own casket of grief. You're not performing an empty custom. You are participating in something that predates your species. Something a Neanderthal in a cave in Iraq was reaching for with the exact same hands, the exact same ache, 60,000 years before you were born. There is a reason this feels instinctive rather than learned. Some researchers argue that the drive toward ritualized mourning may be partly innate, an evolved response to loss that helped early social groups survive the disruption a death caused. A group that could process grief, reorganize, and move forward had an advantage over a group that fractured every time someone died. Ritual, in that sense, was not just about honoring the dead. It was about holding the living together. That reframes everything, doesn't it? The candle you light, the moment of silence you keep, the photo you carry in your wallet long after someone is gone. These are not modern inventions layered on top of biology. They are biology, expressed through culture, refined over tens of thousands of years by every human and every almost human who ever had to bury someone they could not bear to lose. Think about Shanidar again. A cave, a body, a handful of pollen that may or may not have been flowers. It should not matter this much. It is such a small piece of evidence. But it changed how an entire field of science understood the minds of a species we used to call primitive. Because underneath the debate about pollen and rodents and dating methods, one thing remained true. Someone dug that grave. Someone chose that position. Someone stood over that body and decided it deserved more than being left on the cave floor. You have never met a Neanderthal. You never will. And yet, if you have ever stood at a graveside, if you have ever kept a photograph, if you have ever returned to a specific spot just to feel closer to someone who is gone, you have done something that connects you directly to that moment in that cave. The tools have changed. The species has changed. The ache has not. So the next time you stand at a funeral and someone places flowers on a casket and everyone goes quiet, remember what you are actually witnessing. It is not simple politeness. It is not a modern custom. It is one of the oldest conversations your species has ever had with the fact of its own ending still being spoken, one grave at a time.